What is up today, fellow modelers? We are going to be doing the 1/48 scale Tamiya Spitfire with some awesome chipping methods, and I'm not going to speak in a British accent because it's awful. Some awesome blue goo for the windscreen. Also, some really awesome Marine Spitfire camo. Let's get into it. So first we have this beautiful boxing of the Tamiya 1/48 scale Spitfire, and I just gotta say, you can do a short wing Spitfire or the regular Spitfire, and this thing is just sick, man. It's such a cool box art. I have had my eye on this kit for a long time. Getting into the box here, we got a couple of bags of sprue and some decals and some instructions. There's three different variations for this Spitfire, one being the long-winged Spitfire and the short clipped wing Spitfire. Also, there's another canopy version of this as well. It also includes two different types of landing gear sets. So these decals are very awesome. The colors are really nice, but they are super thick, almost impossible to deal with. Follow along in this video to figure out how to deal with these really tough Tamiya decals. Moving on to the instructions, they're very well laid out for these three different versions of the Spitfire. And also, I'm getting used to Tamiya instructions. This is my fourth kit of Tamiya that I've built, and I'm really getting used to the colors and everything. As you saw in the first photo, I'm building the first decal version of this Spitfire. So let's get on with the build. Let's start cutting some sprue and getting on with some trimming. One way of trimming your models is using a flat-sided X-Acto blade or just a regular X-Acto blade. As both do work, you just have to be a little bit more careful with the regular one. Then do some sanding on the points that it was clipped off from the sprue, and you should be good to go to connect these pieces together and do your dry fit. Now, attaching some little fiddly bits to the interior of the cockpit. I use some sticky tack to stick it to the toothpick, and sometimes this actually doesn't work as well as I'd like it to. So I have to use some tweezers to get it off the sticky tack because it's just too sticky. But as you can see, I struggled greatly here, and I wish I didn't struggle so greatly. But I just wanted to show that this could cause problems using the sticky tack method. So after fiddling with it for 15 minutes, I decided to just attach it with some tweezers, as this was the easier route to go, but I had to be careful not to send this part into the non-existence of the carpet. Carefully cutting out the other small tiddly bits, I can attach to this blue tack and stick it to my airplane. So in this kit, it does feature that the door can open in the Spitfire, and I think that's really cool. You just saw blade that door wide open and attach an existing piece that they include in the kit. I'm not going to do that with this Spitfire, but the next one that I do, I may do that option. Next is on with painting the interior of the kit. I just mixed some white with some Vallejo olive drab green, and that was going to be my base color of the interior. As you can see, the cockpit is very well detailed, and there is a lot of minuscule parts here that just look really fresh and nice, as a regular Tamiya kit should be. I'm just spraying with my Grex airbrush here, and the PSI is, I keep it pretty high actually. I keep it at like 25 to 30, especially with Vallejo paints. It just seems to spray better, and I'm able to get thicker coats, especially when you don't really need thin coats for these types of areas. This part here gets assembled later in the build. Now I spray these little ledges to get the interior color onto the outside of the model. And then I actually end up wiping it off just with a wet rag right after I get done spraying. Then I go ahead and put on a clear gloss coat. This helps me weather the model later in the build. Now I can paint all the interior parts black that need to be black, all these panels. I recently got a better tip about how to do black panels and stuff, and I think I'm going to use this in the future. And that is to tape off all of the black panels and spray them separately. So I'll try that next time. Honestly, I just really enjoy painting these little black parts and things like that in the middle of the cockpit. So I'm going to try it in the next build and see how I like it. But for now, I'm painting these things a little bit of a lighter green, just to give it a little bit of contrast and try something new. After a couple coats, this ended up looking very nice. Now moving on to the seat. I used a German dark brown for this seat in particular, and I wanted to give it a nice weathered leather type of look. So I used a plethora of different colors and a plethora of different washes as well, light brown and dark brown washes, to give it that kind of leathery type of texture. I also used the same method on the steering wheel with lighter browns. Probably one of my favorite parts is the seats themselves. It just is really satisfying to see them come out and be really, really cool and neat and realistic looking. So I used a cotton swab to wash some of that wash off because it was a little bit too much. Then I painted some dials with some black paint and a tiny little brush. This turned out to be pretty well. Then I went ahead and painted all the switches red that needed to be red, or that I wanted to be red, and that gives the model more detail and makes it look a lot better. Now I can use a interiors wash by Mk.Vb and put it into all my panel lines. This just accents some color to the actual green color itself. I apply it to the other side, and it's very satisfying to watch it recess into all the panel lines and accent that awesome detail. Then I apply it everywhere else in the model and just watch the magic happen. Now I can use a darker wash to accent further in the areas that would be more dirty, which is pretty much the whole model itself. So now I use a cotton swab to dab off where I don't think that the dirt should be. But I do this while the other thinner is wet too, so that it really has a chance to thin out and cloud up a lot. Because the more clouding you get, the more type of faded, cloudy, weathering type of look you get around those access panels. And as you can see, it worked out pretty good. I let it dry, and then I can clean it up with a cotton swab, and this stuff wiped right off with no thinner or anything. But be wary, because if you wait too long, if you wait like a day or two, then this stuff is really hard to get. It actually bonds into the plastic. So just wait a couple hours and then go back to it and wipe it off. I then accent these black things with some natural colors wash. That way it gives it a kind of dusty look. And that is the finished interior, other than some chipping effects, which we'll get to in a minute. For this chipping method, I'm going to use a couple different methods. I like using a sponge, and I also like using a dry brush. So what I do with the brush is I dip the brush in paint and get it nice and wet. And then what I do is I just take a paper towel and wash that brush over and over and over and over again until it's completely dry, almost like there's nothing else on it. And what I'll do is go around the whole model and just brush it lightly on all those raised access and raised panels and stuff like that. And then it gives it a nice kind of dull look. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and dip the brush again, and I'll actually just dab it off like a lot, but not as much as the first time. And it'll be a little bit more accessible to get paint onto that panel, so it's a little bit shinier. And what I'll then do is just carefully go around everywhere and just lightly touch certain areas, certain specs, certain things. Then I can clear matte coat it and get this thing ready to put together. This step just unifies everything together and makes it look really realistic and not glossy, since the wash is done. Now I can do my chipping effects with a little sponge. I cut the sponge into a triangular shape this time, as I think it would get a better effect. And I think it actually worked. So I dip and dab this in certain spots in the cockpit where I think that the chipping would look good the best. Sometimes I squeeze a little bit too much, but that's okay. I just put a little spit on my pinky and clean it right up. As they say, there is a lot of blood, sweat, and spit in model kits. So as I go around here, just dipping and dabbing everywhere I can with the sponge, it looks really, really solid after that. And here, I just chip it a little bit more than the other access panels because your feet would be hitting this stuff. So, but overall, this is probably the best way to chip anything is with a sponge. And also rip the sponge a little bit so it gives it a nice texture, a nice altered texture. It also looks like I'm pressing harder than I actually am on the actual model, but really I'm just barely tapping it with that paint on there. And when I dip, when I wipe off the excess, after I put the paint on the sponge, I wipe it off on the paper towel. After I do that, I make sure to not wipe off too much because then it can ruin the texture and make it look really cloudy. So with a sponge, you want to kind of keep it a little bit like half wet is what I have learned. And then if you need to press harder, you can, and if not, you can just dab it and dip it just like I am now. There seriously is a method to this sponge technique, and it's taken me a long time to even get where I'm at, which I'm not crazy about, models. You know this. I model for fun. I model for enjoyment. I just love this hobby, and I love sharing it with others. I'm a model collector is what I am. And I think that's more important to me than anything is just having the kits and sharing the build with others. I just love that part. I'm not going to enter a contest and win a contest with any of my models, but someday I probably will. So this is one of those things that they look for in contests, is this mid seam. Now I struggle to get this seam dealt with on all of my kits. It's probably my biggest enemy. But I taped it off, I sanded it down really good, put some Tamiya thinner, and just went away with it. This is a little trick I picked up from me really not wanting to sand a bunch of seams. So I put a 1200 grit piece of sanding paper on my Dremel, taped it, hillbilly rigged this thing to all hell, and it worked great. I gotta say, there's no seam on this kit. It really did do a great job sanding this down, and I didn't have to work that hard for it. I will definitely have to look for some sanding attachment kits for my Dremel that have as high a grits as 1200 and 6000 and 9000, because I just kept putting paper on and kept sanding that seam down, and I did it on all the seams on this kit. Then I used some plastic buddy, water-based, so that you can just wipe it away with a cotton swab. And as you can see, that's the biggest seam that I had in this whole Tamiya kit, is that one little tiny crack, which actually was my fault from the X-Acto knife, so it wasn't even Tamiya's fault. Then I could squeeze the cockpit in there, and it fits just right in there. I didn't even glue it in. And these tail pieces go right in as well. Also, they fit in so good. I mean, the tail pieces for me on Revel kits are always a hassle. They're always crooked or whatever. So this is just super on Tommy's part to have these parts be perfect. Also, I used micro saw to re-scribe my panel lines and then put some Tamiya extra thin on those panel lines to get that dust out. And I'd use the same method on these rear panels as well. When I'm doing this method, I'm actually just barely scraping the surface with this Tamiya, because if it kind of skews in one direction or the other, you could be left with a really bad seam. So I am just barely touching this thing with this saw, and that seems to work best for me. Then I lightly dab it with some extra thin, and you can see the panel line come out perfect. I think this is my favorite part of the kit is the actual bottom of the wing. There's just so much good detail on the bottom of the wing especially, and I'm just really happy with all this detail. But the attachments for the wings are super big, so you got to be really careful in cutting these things out, as I am here. And if you're careful, then it won't be a bad thing. It won't be a nightmare, and it won't be a pain in the butt. So just during this process, just take your time and be really careful in cutting these knobs off. Also, be careful not to cut off the gun knobs as they stay on the kit. This process takes a while, as I usually do get pretty good finishes after I'm done, so I just wanted to share how I did it. Now I can assemble the wings, or at least dry fit them. I squeeze the wings together and make sure that there's no other spots that I need to take care of before I glue in the wings. And there wasn't. So then I glued the wings together. Using some Tamiya extra thin, a little bit of time and patience, and a couple of clamps, the wings go together super well. After they dry for a day, I then sand out the ridges. I first use 1200 grit, then I move to 2000, and move on from there. I typically like using 1200 grit at the start because it doesn't damage the model in any way and it gets rid of all the glue. Then I can rescrab all my panel lines around the wings. Now I am rescribing all the panel lines on the wings. Using the same methods as I did on the fuselage, I use it on the wings and it worked out great. I paint the inside of this little air intake black, as these instructions say, and since you can't really see in there, I didn't put too much detail on it. But maybe on the next build, I will. All the parts on the Tamiya kit fit really well, other than this little part here. I actually struggled with this. I didn't know whether to put it upside down, sideways, or backwards. So I just put it on the way I thought it looked best, stuck it to the model, and sent it. This is probably one of the only kits that had a bad fit, as the corners didn't really line up that much, and I wasn't sure exactly which way to put it on, so it didn't really have a good seam line, so I did have to sand that out a little bit more. Then I attached some other fiddly bits. So as I do some easy stuff here with painting some blacks and things like that, and the props and the wheels, I just wanted to make a quick shout out to the Model Geek podcast. Dude, your podcast is awesome. I love it. I've been listening to every single episode from the start till now for the last 2 weeks, and I'm just fully endeavored in this whole Model Geek podcast thing. Every single episode is filled with tips, tricks, interesting things, and no, they didn't pay me to say this. I am just a fan of those guys in the model world, and just can't say thank you enough for your contribution to the modeling society. And back to the build. So I am using some Tamiya tape to tape off my, I know this is a bit mundane. I should be using some masks nowadays. But anyways, I am cutting it out, and that's just the way it's going to happen. I also use some clear tape as well, some Christmas wrapping tape to, don't ask me how this went. This is just dumb. I mean, it works really well because you're able to see every single line, but it's so hard to peel off, and it also leaves glue marks. So I recommend not doing that step, is not putting cellophane tape on. It's so hard to pull off. So stick to your Tamiya tapes and just deal with not being able to see whatsoever. I cut my 6mm tape in half and used little tiny lines to stripe the actual clear part around the border of the whole canopy. Then I go ahead and use some liquid mask. I just think this is the easiest way for clear bubble top canopies, honestly. Having to go about and cut each type of tape and cut it in different lengths for each side and blah, 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 blah is just a pain. So just use the mask, and it's going to save you a lot of headaches. Then I attach the spinner and got that ready to go for paint. Now I can assemble these wings, and the wings were a great fit as well. They basically barely even fit on. It's such a tight fit. I could probably chuck this model across the room, and it would probably stay intact without even gluing it, other than probably the horizontal stabilizers, honestly. I'm just testing the fit on the spinner, and it kind of clicks into place there, and you can take it off and put it back on, and it clicks right back into place. I took it off about 50 times. Then I can attach all the rest of the fiddly bits and get this thing ready for paint. So, funny story about this gun sight. The gun sight is inside the model somewhere. As I was painting, it kind of fell off at some point, and it's rattling around in there. So in the final pictures, you don't see it in there because guess what? It's probably in the back of the fuselage somewhere. So, yep. That sucks because I put a lot of time into it, actually. Just painting it perfectly, and I tried to shake it around and find it, but I was shaking it so hard the gear was going to fall off. So I just gave up and said, all right, whatever. It's not a big deal. When I get my next kit, maybe I'll get an aftermarket set of crap, and I'll put the kit ones inside the old model. So I continue with rescribing panel lines and stuff. Here, I am scribing some more panel lines as I saw that I didn't get all of them. But onto this canopy part, you got to scribe these off perfectly, or else the canopy will actually sit up like a millimeter off of the fuselage. So just make sure you got these parts trimmed out nicely, and honestly, I'd sand the bottom of them a little bit just to make sure that they're sitting in there properly. But I used some crystal clear glue and some micro liquid tape. This is my new favorite tool, is a micro liquid tape for my sliding canopies, as I can lift it off and put it as an open canopy or put it back as a closed canopy. And the Tamiya fits are perfect, so there's no worries in spacing or anything like that. But I put it as a closed canopy to do all the painting. So here I'm attaching the landing gear to the landing gear doors, and this is an important step to pay attention to which number goes where. Because if you put one with the other, I'm pretty sure they end up backwards. I'm not sure. I marked all my numbers on my sticks that I held them with, but I would definitely make sure that you pay attention and keep track of your numbers on which landing gear goes to which gear door. And who knows, I may have put them on backwards, to be honest. Honestly, I am not the biggest fan of Spitfires. I think the one at Oshkosh that I saw was super sweet. I mean, in the sky, I mean, holy cow. I wasn't that excited about this kit until I started really painting the camo, and then I really fell in love with the Spitfire. So this kit really changed my mind about Spitfires right at this point, is when I was spraying this black on the nose and everything, and I was like, ah, dude, this is sick. This is just a cool freaking airplane. I get why people love this airplane, and I love it now. But I wasn't the biggest fan at the start of this build. It's like, I got it, you know. There's been a million Spitfires that have been built, and, you know, I wasn't going to change the game in any way. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just paint the Spitfire and get it done with, and so we can move on to the next step, some old Revel kits and stuff like that. But it's really changed my mind. I really like this airplane now, and it was really fun painting. So here I'm painting the outside of the canopy with some interior green mixed with white. And now I'm also mixing the bottom color. So I just called out for Tamiya colors on this kit, as it calls for like a 3:5 ratio of certain colors. It's all in the instructions. So I mixed those together, added a few drops of water, and got to spraying on the underside. With this kit, I did nothing special. So I did all straight colors. I didn't want any base shading or pre-shading or anything like that, as it would take away from the camo look that I was going for, and I was kind of going for a newer Spitfire type of look. I wasn't going for something really dirty. I wanted something really clean and nice, and just wanted to accent where I truly needed to accent. I did 3 to 4 layers of paint here, and just lightly going over everything a million times. I kept my air pressure at about 30 just to get this paint out there and nice and smooth, and make sure that everything was going to go well with my airbrush and didn't clog much. And that's just a safe way to layer this. When I do more specific work with panel lines and stuff like that, I definitely use less air pressure. But for this, I just figured let's just make this nice and clean and do nice thin layers. I researched all the colors and found that Ocean Gray was the bluish color on the bottom of the Spitfire, and Vallejo has this color. So this is a sweet looking color, I gotta say. I really like the shade of blue. And I apply a lot of thin coats to the top layer too, just making sure that everything's covered in this color, as I'm doing the weathering effects after the coat of paint's on, because I wanted a nice clean look. Once that blue is put on, I can then use some blue sticky tack to make my camouflage. And what I do here is I just put it in the basic formation of where the camouflage would go, and then use a brush to then push out the sticky tack wherever it needs to be pushed out, and kind of make that camo pattern rugged and rigid, and squish it down to the model, and it makes it stick to the model better. All the things that it needs to do, I do with the brush, and I basically just put it in this unspecific spot to where it needs to go, and then deal with it when I get to the brush part. Once I have it in a good spot, I can then squish it around and make sure that all my ridges kind of fade in, and make sure that they get the right look. to what I'm going for in that specific area, whether it's more rigid cut or more square cut or just a more faded look. So I tried a couple different things in covering up these areas so that my airbrush wouldn't overspray. And one of the things was putting that paper on, and the other thing was putting some more white cheap tack on to cover up all of the blue. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get any overspray, as this green is very dark and any type of overspray would be seen on any part of the model. So I made sure to cover up all my areas really good and covered it with green. Also doing really nice light thin coats several times over the whole model. I'm using the same air pressure, and now we can watch some satisfying peeling. As you can see, it left a great sharp line, almost not too sharp. It's not a very ridge sharp line. It's almost like a barely faded kind of sharp line. So if that makes sense, it just left a really good line. I'm really happy with this result. I can now clear coat it and get to some decals. So for the clear coat, I'm actually using polyurethane clear coat from Home Depot, if that's not funny. So it's just what I picked up. It goes through airbrush fine. It's really thin, but it's probably dangerous to spray. I would probably use a mask if I were you, spraying this stuff. Now I'm weathering some of the landing gear stuff, and gonna put on these decals, man. As I said before, the Tamiya decals are rough. Let me tell you, I had a problem with these things. I probably put 10 coats of microsol on this thing, and it just would not stretch out. It would not fade away. And they also broke on me, as you can see here. I struggled with this part. This was just a pain. I dealt with this for like 20 minutes. And then I literally got to a point where I was like, I can't do it on my own. So I went to a Facebook group, and they taught me how to do these Tamiya decals. So this is how you deal with Tamiya decals, as they are a pain in the butt. You get a candle warmer, you stick it on your table, and let it heat up. You get some warm water, and you stick a little tiny bin on that candle warmer and let that thing nearly boil. Then you stick the decals in, make sure they're nice and hot, wait about 4 to 5 seconds, and it should be good to go. You should be able to take your decals off and apply them to the model. If you wait too long, dip the decals back in the water as it reactivates the glue, and then you can reset the decals on the model nice and hot. Make sure at all times your decals remain nice and hot. Then go ahead and set your microsol on top of them and roll it out with a Q-tip. That's the best way I've found to deal with Tamiya decals so far. If they silver on you, you can go over it with microsol on the silvered part and poke little tiny holes in it, and that should take care of the problem. This is Ammo MIG weathering solution, and this is really cool stuff. I just put it on, and after a few seconds or few minutes, I just wipe it right off. It just leaves all those accent panels nice and weathered, and it gives a nice streaking effect. It looks like I'm hammering my model with the paper towel, but I'm really not. It's got 2 coats of varnish on it, so I'm not too concerned about the outcome. And also, make sure to use 2 coats of varnish on your decals, as this will help with that fading effect. Then I wash the rest of the model with some dark green and pale blue weathering things, and also paint these tips yellow, as you could see that the decals did not work out. Then I can put the prop on, and these highly detailed exhaust pipes, almost looking realistic, almost. And I can assemble the landing gear. It was kind of tricky getting those landing gear in, but you just have to be careful and finagle with it for a little bit, and then you're good to go. And pull off this awesome tape. This is the most satisfying part of the video, and it's always the most exciting part of the build. Just ripping off that tape and just getting you're almost done, man. You're almost done with this model. Oh man, I'm so excited to finally get some pictures of this thing and share it. And that's just my mindset of going through this whole process. Once you're at the tape phase, it's just like, oh man, I can't wait. you'll be able to see my glue marks, which I clean up later, when I pull off this cellophane tape, as it is super hard to peel off. I mean, I'm serious. So the paint doesn't bond with the cellophane, so that was just the paint chips that came off of the cellophane. And you'll see here in a second how hard it is to peel off the actual tape. This is just the paint that's on top of the cellophane because it doesn't bond to the cellophane. So I'm just peeling off this tape and just wrenching it, man. It's so hard to pull off. I don't know if I will do this again. I'm surprised, actually, that the canopy didn't come off. I'm really surprised. But here is the final kit, and thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. I really appreciate every view and every subscriber, and please consider to subscribe. Check out the Model Geek podcast, as there's a lot of great content out there. Enjoy the rest of the pictures, and let's get back to building.